Good morning. My name is Robert McDonald. I'm the Associate Director of Libraries for Technology and Research at Florida State University. And this will be kind of a late recording of my keynote address, Library 2.0, which was at the Electronic Resources and Libraries Conference on March 23rd, 2006 at the Georgia Institute of Technology. My original presentation at Georgia Tech was not recorded fully, so I went back and did this for those of you who have called me in the last month or so asking about my presentation, my PowerPoint, and so forth. So here we go. Library 2.0 is the topic that I'll be speaking about today, and what I want to talk about here is kind of the next steps for libraries as they move forward in relation to electronic resources and their web environment that they support. But let's begin by talking about library, the term library, what we really mean by that. And kind of as a cliche here, I'm going to look at a couple of definitions that fall within that. What is a library? Well, the OED second edition, although I use the online version for this, said library is a place set apart to contain books for reading, study, or reference. Now, as a contrast to that, kind of a millennial take on this, or a Library 2.0, if you will, take on this is the definition that's currently listed in Wikipedia from March 15th, 2006. Modern libraries are increasingly being redefined as places to get unrestricted access to information in many formats and from many sources. Whoa, that's big. Unrestricted access to information. Well, what's the real difference here when we look at the older versus the new, or as I'll refer to in this presentation, Library 1.0 versus Library 2.0? And I'm still talking about a relatively recent time frame for libraries. I'm not looking too far back in the past, mainly over the last 15 years, 20 years. Well, the big difference that we see there is the media. Now, libraries for a long time have had media other than books or physical media, but we've just now started to have online access to resources and been able to broadcast these resources. So books, they're a physical media. We have lots of physical media in libraries. And e-resources, the main reason that all of us gathered here today, both in person and online for this conference, is the hypermedia, the new media, if you will. Well, libraries also have services. The old types of services, well, we would find the physical. That was one of the things that we did very well. New, we find it on the network for you. In 1996 or so, you would find it yourself or myself on a network. 1996 up to a certain point. And then in 2006, it's find on my network, because at this point, everyone has their own network in their house. They have their own personal network, whether it's completely smart and online all the time, but they have a network of things such as iPod to play music, and that kind of syncs with their laptop or their desktop, just like their personal planner might if it's a BlackBerry, or if it's some kind of a Palm handheld, or if it's some kind of a new Windows handheld. And what happens after you find it for the person on the network, or they find it on their own network? They want it delivered to MySpace. And I put MySpace in here for a particular reason, because it has really taken off in the last 3 months in terms of use. And there are other services much like MySpace, but it's pretty interesting how MySpace has really tapped into the market for that type of service. Much like Facebook has in the academic community, but MySpace really is starting to grow in that area for those who aren't currently at a university or in school the way that Facebook does this. But what's the difference there? Well, the big difference is push versus pull. The old way would be for you to go and pull it, for you to go and find it, for the patron to go dig it up. And the new way, Library 2.0, if you will, is the push or the broadcast. So library 1.0 equals pull, library 2.0 equals push. Well, what is the real difference there? And I brought up a slide here, The World is Flat by Tom Friedman. I could have talked about a lot of different books. I could have talked about Freakonomics. I could have talked a little bit about the essence of what's there with a book that's forthcoming talking about the whole essence of the long tail. But I chose Friedman's because the big essence here of Friedman's book is communication. It doesn't take very long for word to move about worldwide, and that's why the world there on his book anyway is starting to look about as thin as the U.S. quarter. And in a recent book that I was just reading by Joe Klein, one of the things he talked about was kind of the famous speech that Robert Kennedy gave on the night of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. And the big essence there was that the entire community he was speaking to in Indianapolis did not know yet of the assassination or of the eventual death of Martin Luther King later that night. So Robert Kennedy was the one that actually had to tell them about that, and he did it in a very graceful way, a way that in a few short 4 minutes united the community and in fact prevented a lot of the violence that happened in other communities elsewhere in the U.S. after that tragic incident. So when we get back to communication, that was kind of an interesting aside, but when we get back to communication and really look at how that's changed our world and changed the way libraries operate in that world, well, now we broadcast. That's what Library 2.0 does. That's what all of what in a modern sense, web services do for libraries. People would come find us online, back in '96, and they would find what we had to offer, what we could make available online. Well, now we need to step that up a good bit, and we need to start offering Library 2.0 types of web services that broadcast out to our users, so our users can pick and choose things to have automatically sent to them, especially on certain research topics that they have of interest. So if we look at this in essence again and review for a minute where I've been coming from with Library 1.0 versus Library 2.0, Library 1.0 was definitely an archive. Library 2.0 is more of a broadcast. And now we're going to watch part of a video here, and I told you this at the original conference. You were like, why is he going to make me watch this crazy video about the system design of ARPANET? Well, I'll tell you why. Because Robert Kahn's one of my greatest heroes. I love the fact that not only was he working with a consulting firm when they came up with the main design of ARPANET, but that later on in life, now he's been in charge of the agency that helped develop, especially if you've worked with DSpace, you'll know about this, the persistent URL system that's used in DSpace. So he's had a very long and prestigious career. And one of the things I want you to just take a look at here is the decade of the video recording, the close, the culture that's apparent in what he's going to say to you. And then I've got a few words that I want to say about this little clip when we're done with it.
Concept of that network would have to embody the efficient utilization of communication resources, as well as to provide a system which was both reliable, error-free, and provide the high bandwidth needed for interactive use of those resources. This means that users sitting at a terminal would be able to hit a key and see a response virtually instantly, almost as if that computer, wherever it were, looked like it was in the same room. A simple way to interconnect computers and to form such a network is to place wideband leased circuits, in the case of the ARPANET 50 kilobit per second circuits, between each of the computers, and then to interconnect each of the computers to each other to form a fully connected network. As more sites come onto the network, the requirement is then to connect that site to every other one, which means that the extension of the network is just not a graceful thing. And so this naturally leads to the concept of a store and forward technique in order to cut down on the expense of building such a network. And so let's erase these lines over here to leave ourselves for the moment with a loop network which can be extended. And in this type of network, this computer, for example, would talk to this computer not by sending in a message directly, since there is no circuit, but sending a message first to this computer, which would then store it and forward it onto this computer, thereby acting as a relay. In order to have a reliable network of this sort, each of the individual computers must be sufficiently reliable to maintain the kind of communications that's needed. But unfortunately, most computer installations are just not reliable enough, and this leads to the notion of a small mini processor to take on the functions of the computers and to allow a single design to then be propagated among all the installations.
A little goof there in my slides. But let's think a little bit about what Khan said right there. What he's really describing there hasn't really changed that much. I mean, we've done a lot in the last couple of decades toward improving the system that he talks about there. But we haven't really tapped it to its potential. And that's what I want to describe here in these next few slides in what I believe could be the actual potential of the fact that at this point we do have broadband outreach to a majority of our users, at least in the academic setting. I mean, there's still places where that's not necessarily the case. But in terms of an academic setting, it's affordable enough now for faculty at home to have broadband. For our students, you know, they're forwarded to an apartment somewhere close by to our campuses, and they can split the cable modem, the DSL 4 ways, and so it becomes one of those kind of expenses, kind of like electricity and kind of like water service that you end up wanting to have as a student, because it lets you get access to the resources of the library from your own home environment in a majority of ways. So let's look at Library 1.0, and I stole this kind of idea from a couple of presentations that Lawrence Lessig gave a few years ago. And what I wanted to do is let you think about Library 1.0 in terms of the things that it accomplished. Libraries acquired stuff. We stored that stuff. Then we would lend it to you when you came in. And we would find other stuff that was a lot like the stuff that we had in place and try to borrow that for you, or possibly acquire and store a copy of it for you if it was important enough to the majority of our users. So as we move forward and we look at what Library 2.0 has to offer, well, we still acquire things, of course. We still store them. But at this point, we broadcast them more than we do find things for you, because most users don't really want to come into our facilities unless there's a service that we offer that lends itself to being in a physical space. Like, students still love to come study in academic libraries, but they like group space and team space so that they can do the types of work that they're doing in their classes now. But other than that, even the faculty, they really want us to broadcast the information that they need to their offices, their homes, to maybe their second office at another university that they're affiliated with, etc. And I would say to you that this last concept in Library 2.0 could be something like Create, it could be something like Mash, it could be something like Integrate. I'm not sure what the fourth item is in Library 2.0. It definitely has something to do with openness and availability. But I'm going to let you think about that. And I know I've had some people talk to me about this, and especially during the ER&L conference, I had several people come up to me and talk about this fourth concept that I think is still emerging. I think you could grasp on several things that could fit that role. But then as we move forward, we take a look at this again, Library 1.0. Well, the majority of what we did was acquire and store. That kind of went too forward on me too fast. And what we also did was lend and find. Now, Library 2.0. The majority of what we do, I am going to say, is something like broadcast and create content for our users. And, of course, this is just kind of going crazy on me because I got too many animations in this PowerPoint, but excuse that for a minute. And let's look at Library 2.0. We're still going to acquire and store. There's always going to be a big part of that, but we're going to do more storing of digital information rather than physical information. It's just going to be a different media type, and we're going to broadcast that out to our users, and we're going to help them or enable them, and they're going to create new knowledge and various views of old knowledge based on what we broadcast out to them. Now, I'm going to let you hear a video from Tim O'Reilly where he talks about Reading 2.0. And this is from Scholarship and Libraries in Transition, which was a symposium at the University of Michigan from March 10th, 2006. And it shows you how quickly our world has become flat. Because although I attended this conference, the videos for this were put online a couple days afterwards. Within a week after that, I had made this snippet that directly supports what I'm talking to you about here. So within the course of a month, you had a meeting that was turned to video, that was put online, that became part of my presentation to you now, less than 20 days later, even though this is a little bit after that, the fact of that, because I'm recording this again to go online. But now mine's going to go online, and it's going to have part of Tim O'Reilly's. It's going to have part of that old late 50s video of Robert Kahn, and it's going to create a new piece of knowledge, a way of looking at libraries in a way that O'Reilly and Kahn never thought about when they created this media. So let's take a look at O'Reilly for a second.
Visions of the future, and these are not specific to the book market, but I just want to give you an idea of some of the things that I'm thinking about where we can take our lessons from. I've been talking a lot about something I've taken to calling Web 2.0, which is really the Internet as platform, and how as a platform it has certain rules for success. And so first of all, Web 2.0 is about information businesses, so it's already kind of starting to overlap with the world of the book. Google is not a publisher, but they're a lot more like a publisher than Microsoft was. So they're information businesses. They deliver their software as a service. And this last point is most important. They really get their success by harnessing collective intelligence. And I have really spent a lot of time trying to get this idea across, that what distinguishes the websites that made it through the dot-com bust is that they all have this attribute in common. They're really about, once you're on the network, how do you gain value from the network effects that you create? How do you gain value from your users? How do your products get smarter the more people use them?
So think about that. Think about what O'Reilly just said there. He's talking about web as platform, WASP. I've thought a lot about lately of network as platform, and you could say, there's a lot of similarities there, but he's talking about web services, things that businesses like his that publish the way they do can offer, and the way they can offer them. And they merge in with what I'm showing you here in this slide from the forthcoming book that I talked about, The Long Tail, Why the Future of Business is Selling Less of More. And really what that all about is you sell more of one thing, one particular item, than you do a majority of items, where the difference is something like the current Kelly Clarkson album might sell millions of copies right now because she's at the peak of her popularity, whereas the bulk of your business online, especially as you store more things in a digital format that can be repurposed much more easily than physical media, then the majority of your business becomes all the one-off sales that you do for the oldest of the old one-time wonder hits that go way back, for the past 60 years. And the reason I wanted to kind of bring this up is because I believe that as libraries move forward and start looking at what they're going to do in terms of services in Web 2.0, it's going to follow that line that we see currently with the mass digitization products. We're going to offer more and more content online that may only be used once. But if we have 2 million items online, and each of those items is only used once, then we're still doing a very brisk business, and we're still supporting the intellectual needs of our users, especially in academic libraries. Well, now we're kind of to the part of my talk where I want to look at new types of web services that do things for users in new ways, and that could be analogous to types of things that libraries could definitely do for users within the Library 2.0 framework and in terms of web services that we could offer. Well, let's look at the first thing here. Last.fm is a really great site that what it really does is it takes a tool that a company wrote that creates a small database of your preferences in music, and then it aggregates that with all of kind of known commercial recording history and starts to come up with items that are similar to the type of music that you like, and it starts creating sound lists for you. Well, this was created as a little software product, and they weren't quite sure what to do with it. Well, it's morphed into this site, Last.fm, that actually ends up creating your own personalized type of radio station based on the musical format that you like. Now, I like Van Halen, so I looked them up, and basically it's going to give me a list of other things that I'm going to like, and of course AC/DC, Guns N' Roses, Ozzy Osbourne, Aerosmith, Def Leppard, Led Zeppelin, ZZ Top, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple are all definitely things that fit that bill. Now, the more that I listen to items through Last.fm, and the more the little tiny piece of software that they install on your computer attributes the things that I listen to, the better it knows my preferences in music. If all I listen to, say, is Van Halen, AC/DC, well, then maybe I get a better listing of the related items to that. But then the more wide in terms of variety of music that I listen to, the more types of things that they'll recommend. So I would make a playlist, and the first thing that came up when I hit play was ZZ Top, which of course was in that list. Now let's look at Pandora. Now this is a different take on the same kind of thing, but they're basically offering a similar kind of service. And this was part of the Music Genome Project, where they wanted to analyze mathematically the way commercial music was, so that they could, instead of having to categorize songs with metadata the way a cataloger would, they could do it automatically based on the WAV file that was analyzed of the music. And so if you go to Pandora here, you can do the same kind of thing. You look up one type of artist or song, and then because all the music in here has been analyzed down to its genome, so to speak, then you get a alternate list of recommendations that fit in with the song or artist that you put in, and you can create playlists and customize radio stations and so forth. Well, now let's look at how that would play out. Oop, hit the button too soon. How that would play out in terms of libraries. Well, we're looking at a new product here called Aqua Browser at the Queen's Library in New York. And I did a search here because I wanted to see how this worked for me. Well, it's a really cool catalog that shows me over here to the right suggestions for other things, other subject headings that fit what I originally looked up. And to the left, I get a listing of graphically what I might want to follow in terms of a graphical trail that fits here. Well, this search didn't work too well. It also offers an RSS feed, which I think is very interesting, because that's one of the broadcast type enabled tools that I spoke about earlier. When I look up Lawrence Lessig, at least across the Queen's Library corpus here, I get some of his recent books, but I don't have a large enough corpus of data in the background to really create a lot of connections. I do get some other authors that Bruce Mao, that was a great suggestion. And I get some subject headings, but as you'll notice, there's not a lot of items that they currently own that are in the subject headings. And when you look over here to the left in the graphical interface, it really doesn't make any sense. None of this really fits together in terms of something you would really want to connect with Lawrence Lessig. So, what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that when we're looking at commercial music in Last.fm and in Pandora, they're looking across all known commercial music. Well, this is that long tail kind of effect coming into play. When we look at new types of services for our users' web services, different types of search and navigation and discovery tools, well, when we search that across our generally rather limited corpus of information, it really doesn't make the connections like our users are becoming used to when it really can encompass everything in a known area. So let's look at another search in here that works really well with this new tool. I searched for NIH-NIN, and of course you'll see here on the left there is the connection to Miller, Henry Miller, and you get that pretty much over to the right hand side, and you see that they have a few more items by all of these authors. And they have books and DVDs, and they also have other American authors and so forth that fit into some similar categories there that work out. So you do okay with your search, but you're still not doing as well as if this were say across WorldCat or across the Library of Congress in some way. So let's go look at an academic library that's done something like this, and this is North Carolina State University's library's implementation of Endeca's ProFind suite of tools, and this very same search worked really well. And NIH-NIN, you get all the subject, you get her as an author. You also get some other suggestions and the browse by features by Library of Congress call number. And then if you look further down the page, you see that Henry Miller shows up. So you did pretty well with this simply because my subject was more academic in nature, and when you're doing this type of guided navigation across a corpus in an academic library, it works a little better than in the public library. But now let's go look at Grokr. This is something that Stanford University Libraries has been working with. But what I searched here was not just Stanford's implementation of Grokr. I went across Yahoo, the ACM Digital Library, and Amazon Books, and then I did the same search for Lawrence Lessig. Well, guess what? I came out a little bit better because there was more information to mine. And so this is what's going to be coming into play, in that our physical collections aren't going to be that important anymore. It's going to be important to have every known e-resource item, as well as print item that we control, as well as probably a larger corpus of items that we can borrow in one pile that can then be used with some kind of guided navigation. And one of the interesting things I like about Grokr is how they do a nice visualization, much like Opera Browser, but it groups it into smaller subsets. So you can kind of see here what's in Amazon about Lessig, what's on the web about Lessig, what is, and that includes a good bit because of his website, and then the stuff that concerns law and Lessig, as well as culture and a few other things. So you get a more broad spectrum here with this search tool. But you also see that I had to really enlarge the area I was searching. The entirety of Yahoo's index, the ACM Digital Library, and Amazon Books, to really get what I was looking for in a big way. Well, what happens when you start to offer web services like that? Well, the more services you offer through the web, the more you're going to get mashups and new types of features going on. And this is an example of that with housing maps. This takes Google Maps, combines it with real estate listings from Craigslist, and creates a kind of map for homes for rent for sale. And I chose Atlanta because we were in Atlanta for this conference, and it was easy to see the places that were shown, the pricing, so forth. But of course it only works for things where there are real estate listings within Craigslist to do. But it's a really great idea of that next step, that creation of things once we start making information a little more available through broadcast in terms of web services. And so this gives you a better view of that. You can see all the listings for Metro Atlanta listed by price. Well, what's happening in academic libraries right now in terms of openness? We've got commercial publishers like Springer offering the ability for you to pay a lot of money to have open access to journals, so they're not really restrained by a lack of ability to get the article for your library and so forth. You've got open access self-archiving being allowed by some other publishers like Elsevier, and you've got electronic theses and dissertations, which are really changing the way graduate research is shown online. Well, let's move away from that for a minute. We've talked about the things coming in Web 2.0. We've talked about some of the traditional types of items in Library 1.0. And now I'm going to look at a new tool that if you haven't seen, Alexa, you really need to take a look at it, simply because it will tell you a lot about your website. And it's the type of thing that Google has really excelled at in terms of finding this out about their users so that they know how best to sell advertising, online advertising, so that it will work, so it's not random, so that it's something that the user who's in a current search of web items will really want and need, so that way their actual profit margin starts to look pretty good. So what I did was I put into Alexa in the traffic rankings Florida State University Library's website, lib.fsu.edu, and I compared that with Auburn University, simply because I used to work at Auburn, and I know some of the folks that were in the original audience for this talk were from Auburn, and I knew they wouldn't mind me using it as an example. But when you take a look at this, you see similar patterns in the use, a little more for Florida State simply because we've got more students and we've got more faculty. But it really starts to let you see how you would fare in comparison to other websites. And I think it's pretty fair to look at it from an .edu angle, but if you really want to see something interesting, go look at it from a edu versus a .com angle on any of the normal types of web service retailers like O'Reilly mentions in his talk, like Amazon, Google, etc., and see, or even MySpace, because it's one that's still not completely entrenched, but it's on a tremendous growth spurt right now. Well, when I go look at FSU and look at where people are going on FSU.edu, you'll notice here that the library fares pretty well, 11%. That's slightly behind FSU.edu, the main website, and the magnet.fsu.edu, which is our national magnet laboratory, which is a resource for many scientists throughout the country and in the world. But we fared really well at 11%, because I'll tell you, when I did the same kind of search for a lot of the libraries that I talked about in this talk, it really wasn't quite that high. And in fact, I would suggest and challenge you to go take a look in Alexa at the traffic rankings for your library website and see where it falls within the larger domain of your educational institution, or if you're a public library, where that falls within your municipality use. So now, we're going to wind down a little bit in this talk, and I would suggest to you that this online version of the talk probably wasn't as successful as the in-person talk, mainly because it's a lot different getting up in front of 100 people than it is trying to recreate this for everyone online from my desktop here on a hot summer afternoon while I'm sitting here in my shorts and my flip-flops. But what I want you to think about is this 2.0 mean map. Well, this came from O'Reilly's 2005 talk on Web 2.0, and I've applied this to Library 2.0, but I haven't changed anything in here. What I have added is, he talks about the web as platform. I've talked about the library as the switch or the router for the information, because basically we're going to push this information out to our users anymore. We're not going to depend on them coming in and asking us to find it for them. We're going to have to be proactive. And so I didn't change anything on here because all of it could easily become analogous to new types of library services that we need to be offering. Well, Library 2.0, an attitude, not a technology. That's right. The technology that we're working with, as I showed previously, is really at this point getting pretty old. When we sit around and talk about networking today, we talk about the same kinds of things that Khan talked about. We're making tremendous strides, but at incremental pace. So what we need to really look at is this as an attitude, not a technology. We've got the technology. We just need a few more people pushing it in the right direction. Think about the long tail. You know what your users use from looking at your weblogs. But more and more, we're going to be justified in having services that may only be used by 1 or 2 people, and having lots and lots and lots of them. I'm going to choose a few more here and show the analogy, but I'm going to not go through all of these. But you look at BitTorrent, radical decentralization. Well, what he's talking about there is using the power of many, many machines to move information around. And that really is going to become more in how we get rich media such as video moved around as we offer more and more of that to our users. Blogs, participation, not publishing. This goes back to creation, like I was talking about. More and more libraries, I believe, are going to become part publisher and part disseminator of new information that's only created online. It's not going to be created in some way that takes the time, effort, marketing, and business know-how to publish as a printed object. It's only going to become available online. And small pieces loosely joined. Web as components. This is something that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a second, but it's something that you definitely need to think about as you build new web services for your users and step up to Library 2.0. You need to think about it in terms of incremental steps, just like I talked about with networking. When you offer a new way of looking up new books online, think about how you build that, and think about how you're enabling it from your library system, and how the API there could be repackaged so that it could show all of your current new books, but it could also show the books that are new that are checked out. It could show the books that are new that are available. It could show the books that are new that have some kind of suggested corollary in your guided search using something like Endeca. And how that could be combined with other services like Google Maps. We were looking at the housing maps. I don't know that would necessarily happen, but it's something to think about as you build new services. How will it interoperate? How will the fact that your new book list and the book list from a sister state university, or even from the local private university that's in town, how could they be associated together so that the user could get the most of? How could you create a new books list that would aggregate across multiple institutions that offer joint degree programs? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about here with this meme map. So, in conclusion, and I know that this hasn't been quite the same talk that I gave in Atlanta, but I do hope that it will satisfy folks who didn't get to hear it, or that want to review some of the content that I spoke about. One ring to rule them all are small pieces loosely joined. Well, that's exactly what Kahn was talking about in his network diagram. We can sit around and expect to have direct communication with one person, or we can piece together library services that are coherent and that are what users want in an online environment, and we can loosely join them together to enable our users to create better use of them. Or we can sit around and wait at a reference desk for one direct communication. And that's kind of where, you'll notice the analogy here to the Lord of the Rings. They were on a great quest for one thing to, the magic bullet that's going to do it all. And that's the thing. There's not going to be a magic bullet. It's going to be incremental, starting with what we really started making available to the public around '96 in terms of access to information online. It's going to be a gradually incremental thing over time. And if we're not doing a little something all the time to make our services better and a little more like Web 2.0, then we're going to lose sight of it all, especially if we're waiting around for the next magic bullet that's going to be the thing that drives libraries forward. So I'm going to leave you with that thought, and I'm going to tell you that, personally I think that web services that can work together and interact and develop new things for our users is probably going to be the model that we want to embrace, if only because it was so successful, as we'll see here, from the internet and the explosion that created what we now have as our commercial internet. Well, I'm not going to be able to take questions right now, and I wish that I had written down a few more. when I was answering them at the session in Atlanta. And if anyone has those or wants to start a discussion here, I can edit this probably later on and add a few of these here, but we don't have time for that at this point. But I will leave you with some great references that I think you need to read. Miller's work in Ariadne here talks completely about the whole concept of Library 2.0. Carr's work here in Ariadne talks about new services for users and where libraries, especially academic libraries, ought to be on this. Walt Crawford in his Sites and Insights talks about Library 2.0. And then, of course, if you haven't read O'Reilly's piece on Web 2.0 that came out in at a conference in September 2005, you need to go read that to give some perspective to what I've talked about here today, and to give some perspective to what libraries are doing with e-resources and the future of library web services. Thank you very much.